Hello Internet, nice to see you. Today I want to talk about the difference between two chords that are often confused with each other. I want to talk about the difference between the half-diminished 7th chord and the minor 7th flat 5 chord. And yes, those two chords are different and they are often confused. And in fact, even saying that these two chords are different will sound controversial to some. And I get it. Hey, I used to confuse them too. In fact, if you go and see some older videos in this channel, I definitely use the wrong name occasionally in some videos. So, I'm not here to try to prove anybody wrong. If anything, I'm proving myself wrong on how I used some of those names in the past. I'm just here to clarify the difference because what I see around is that people use the two names interchangeably, but those two chords are different and they're used in a different way. And so, if we don't distinguish them, when we try to learn how to use them, we get confused because we're talking about two different chords. Now, first, these two chords have the exact same notes. So if we take D as the root, for instance, I have D minor 7th flat 5 that has notes D, F, A flat, C, and D half diminished that has notes D, F, A flat, C. So of course at this point you will wonder, they have the same notes. Tommaso, how can they be different if they have the exact same notes? Well, the problem here is that you can't simply look at the notes in the chord to tell what the chord is. This is a simplification that has been made to teach music theory, but it's not true. You have to work not only at the notes in the chord, but you have to look at the context of the chord to understand what a chord is. You have to look at what key are you in, what chord or chords come just before, what chord or chords come just after the chord, if there are any melodic line passing through, etc., etc. So I'm going to explain the difference by showing you how the two chords behave. So let's start from D minor 7th flat 5. Like the name says, this is a minor 7th chord. If we take D minor 7, I have the notes D, F, A, C. And on this chord, we lower the 5th note to create the D minor 7 flat 5. So originally, conceptually if you want, this is a minor chord. Now typically this chord functions as the second chord in a minor key. And like most minor 7th chord, this chord tends to resolve following the cycle of 5th. So the D minor 7th flat 5, just like the D minor 7, will resolve to either G or G minor or G dominant 7 or another chord that has G as the root. For instance, if we are in the key of C minor, D minor 7 flat 5 is actually the second chord and of course tends to resolve to G7. It's not the only possible resolution, but it's the main resolution of this chord. And of course, this chord can be used in major too. So for instance, whenever I have a 2-5-1 in C major, that is a D minor 7, G7, C major 7, I can lower this 5th of this D minor 7th, creating a D minor 7th flat 5 that sounds this way. If you voice lead those chords, you see that the A note in D minor 7 is lowered to an A flat that makes it closer to the resolution note of G. This is called a chromatic intensification. You change this note to make it closer to the resolution note because it has more tension. Yes, I know some people like to explain this using modal borrowing, saying that D minor 7 flat 5 is borrowed from C minor, but honestly, there is no need to invoke the theory of modal borrowing for something that is just a chromatic change of a chord. But that's a story for another time. So this was the minor 7th flat 5 chord. What happened to the half-diminished 7th chord instead? Well, like the name says, a half-diminished chord is part of the family of diminished chords. So it's not originally a minor chord, it's originally a diminished chord. And diminished chord originally, historically, come from dominant 9 chords when we eliminate the root of the chord. So for instance, let me take a B flat dominant 9 chord. The notes are B flat, D, F, A flat, and C. if I eliminate the root B flat, I am left with a D half diminished chord. Notice that this is very similar to the origin of the fully diminished chord, only the fully diminished chord will come from a B7 with a flat 9, so you have the notes B flat, D, F, A flat, and C flat if you want an harmonic to be. And when I eliminate the root of B flat, I am left with a D fully diminished chord. Anyway, the idea here is that the half diminished 7 come from a completely different context and situation than the minor 7 flat 5 chord. And now, since the B flat dominant 9 resolves down a fifth following the cycle of fifth into an E flat major chord, so also the D half diminished chord will resolve to this E flat major chord, and in this case, as you can see, the root goes from D to E flat, so it goes up a half step. That's how it sounds. So as you can see, those two chords come from two completely different contexts and resolve in two completely different ways. Yes, they have the same notes, but they are not the same chord. Now, some people will argue that those two chords are actually the same chord, and the difference in name is just a cultural thing, meaning that most classical musicians call this chord a half-diminished chord, and most jazz musicians call this chord a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Well, there is a grain of truth in that, but this actually reinforces my point that those two chords are actually different. And the grain of truth is that in classical music, we use mostly half-diminished chords, because in that style, that specific sound is more typical. So, of course, most of the time you see that set of notes, it's called a half-diminished chord, because simply this is the most common sonority in that style, statistically speaking. In jazz, instead, we use mostly minor 7 flat 5 chords, and only rarely we use half-diminished chord, because in that style, in jazz, those chords function differently, and again, statistically speaking, we use many more minor 7 flat 5 chords than half-diminished chord. And in that style, again, statistically speaking, we use many more minor 7 flat 5 chord and half-diminished chords, meaning that we resolve them a fifth down, not a half step up. So the difference in name is simply because we are using two different chords and we are calling them correctly in that context. So again, those two chords have the exact same notes, but they have two names, and rightly so, because they work in two completely different ways and are two different chords. One is a minor chord that has been altered, and the other one is a diminished chord, meaning that it comes from an incomplete dominant chord. And they both resolve accordingly. Now you can find out much more on how to use both those sounds and how to use many more sounds in my course, Complete Chord Mastery. Complete Chord Mastery, it's not a book. It's a complete video course made by guitar players for guitar players. All the examples are made on the guitar. You're not gonna find a single piano example in the whole course because it's been made to be immediately practical for all guitar players. You're gonna learn all your theory straight on the fretboard and are gonna be able to apply it immediately in a creative way. If you have a minute, you want to check out Complete Chord Mastery, click on the link on the top right. If you like this video, smash on that like button and don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell, otherwise YouTube will not tell you when I put up a new video. And if you have any suggestions, feedback, comments, write them down below in the comment section. I always read all my comments and I really enjoy hearing from you. This is Tommaso Zillia of musictheoryforguitar.com, and until next time, enjoy.